courtrooms are built on trust. Trust that every word spoken is accurate, every timeline consistent, and every statement true. But in the case of Emmanuel Haro, that trust was quietly shaken. During a recent hearing, one detail surfaced that didn't match the evidence already on record. It was small enough to miss in the moment, yet powerful enough to cast a shadow over the entire testimony. For a trial already surrounded by doubt, this single contradiction became more than a slip. It became a question of credibility. Was it simply an oversight, or was something deeper being concealed? As the courtroom fell silent, the weight of that uncertainty lingered, leaving both the public and the legal teams to wonder what else might not align in the search for truth. Tonight, we examine the detail that didn't add up, why it matters, and how it could shape what happens next in one of the most closely watched cases in the country. But before we dive into this, kindly subscribe to our channel if you believe in fighting for justice, because every view, every comment, every subscriber is a stand against silence and a step toward justice. We've just crossed 5,000 subscribers, all because of your support, and we need that same energy to reach 6,000, then 7,000, and then 10,000. So go ahead and drop your fingerprints on that subscribe button, and definitely where you're watching from, because wherever you are, the day this vision is fulfilled, I will send my appreciation straight to you. Let's keep building this community that stands and fights for justice together. In every courtroom, truth is meant to stand taller than anything else. It is the foundation on which justice rests, the measure by which every testimony is weighed. But in the case of Emmanuel Haro, that foundation has been unsettled. During a recent hearing, one statement was made under oath, spoken with confidence, yet carrying a weight that quickly drew attention. At first, it seemed like a minor point, a detail tucked inside hours of testimony. But as the record was examined more closely, it became clear this statement didn't line up with the evidence already on file. That single contradiction has now cast a shadow across the trial. Because in a case this sensitive, even one detail out of place can shift how the entire story is understood. Tonight, we're not just looking at words spoken in court, we're asking why they didn't match, what that means for the credibility of the testimony, and how this moment could alter the course of everything that follows. To understand why this courtroom detail matters so deeply, we have to step back and look at the case itself. The story began in mid-August when the disappearance of 7-month-old Emmanuel Haro was first reported. His parents, Rebecca and Jake Haro, told authorities that their child had been taken, setting off an immediate wave of concern and an intensive search. For days, investigators and volunteers scoured neighborhoods, roads, and open spaces, hoping for a breakthrough. But as hours turned into days, the story began to shift. What was initially described as an abduction started to unravel under closer examination. Investigators began piecing together timelines, comparing accounts with digital records, and asking questions that grew harder to answer. Eventually, prosecutors brought forward a far more serious claim that Emmanuel had not been taken by a stranger, but had died days before the 911 call was ever made. The charges that followed, murder and filing a false report, sent shockwaves not only through Riverside County, but across the country. At the center of this case are two parents facing the most serious of accusations, a community left in disbelief, and a nation asking how something like this could have happened. The intense media coverage that followed was not just about the tragedy itself, it was about the contradictions, the unanswered questions, and the sense that the public was not being told the full story. This is the backdrop against which every word in the courtroom now carries so much weight, and it's why one single statement, one single inconsistency, has become a focal point in the search for truth. The most recent hearing was expected to follow a familiar pattern: statements, questions, and the slow build of a complex case. But what unfolded inside that courtroom was something few anticipated. As testimony began, one account in particular drew unusual attention. Delivered under oath, it appeared straightforward at first. But as the details were compared against established records, questions started to surface. The timeline described didn't align with earlier evidence. The claim that was made seemed to conflict with official documents already presented, and the account itself contradicted statements given previously in the investigation. Inside the courtroom, there was no dramatic outburst, just a quiet ripple of reaction. Attorneys shifted in their seats. Observers leaned forward. Even the judge appeared to take careful note as the words hung in the air. What should have been a moment of clarity instead raised new uncertainty. The power of that moment wasn't in its volume, but in its silence, the pause that followed, the recognition that something didn't add up. In a trial where every detail matters, credibility is everything. And when one statement breaks from the established record, it doesn't just raise a question about that single piece of testimony, it casts a wider shadow on the case itself. It was in this silence, in this careful observation of what had just been said, that the courtroom shifted. A single detail, spoken confidently but sitting uneasily against the evidence, had now become a turning point. Once the testimony was on record, attention quickly shifted to whether the statement could be verified. And this is where the contradiction became clearer. Investigators had already compiled a careful timeline, drawing from digital records, phone data, and previous interviews. The detail given in court didn't line up with those established points. Phone records suggested different movements. Prior testimony painted another picture. Even documents previously submitted contradicted the new account. It wasn't just a matter of memory being imperfect. The difference was sharp enough to create tension in the room. The defense team immediately seized on the moment, presenting it as proof that inconsistencies existed in the state's version of events. For them, it was an opportunity to question the reliability of the investigation, and to suggest that not every piece of the puzzle had been placed correctly. On the other side, the prosecution pressed harder, underscoring the importance of consistency and accountability. To them, the statement was not only troubling, it was potentially revealing. They leaned into the idea that a contradiction in testimony could point to deeper issues about credibility and truth. For the judge and eventually for a jury, this is the kind of moment that lingers. It wasn't a minor slip or a forgettable misstep. It was a detail substantial enough to challenge the reliability of the person who gave it, and to influence how the entire case might be interpreted. In a courtroom, perception often carries as much weight as fact, and when perception is clouded by contradiction, it can change the way every piece of evidence is seen. This single inconsistency now sits at the center of the trial, demanding to be addressed, demanding to be explained. The ripple effects of that single contradiction were immediate inside the courtroom. Attorneys from both sides recognized its weight and reacted in very different ways. For the defense, it became a point of leverage. They highlighted the inconsistency to suggest that not every part of the state's case was reliable. Their argument leaned on the idea that if one detail didn't align, then other parts of the timeline might deserve closer scrutiny. They framed it as a reminder that certainty is fragile, and that doubt must always be considered. The prosecution, however, leaned into the contradiction with equal determination. Rather than dismissing it, they emphasized how important it was. To them, the inconsistency was not a weakness in their case. It was a red flag that spoke to credibility. They argued that when testimony doesn't match the record, it doesn't erase the truth, it exposes it. Outside the courtroom, the response was just as strong. Members of the public, already invested in the case, reacted with confusion and frustration. Social media filled with questions. Was this an honest mistake, or did it mean something more? Commentators debated what it might signal, while legal analysts weighed in on how contradictions like this can alter the perception of an entire trial. The headlines captured the moment with sharp focus. News outlets across the region, and even nationally, ran stories about the testimony that didn't match. It became not just a courtroom development, but a public talking point, one that reignited conversations about trust, truth, and accountability in the justice system. At the center of all of this is a reminder: in a trial, credibility shapes everything. Jurors don't just weigh evidence, they weigh the reliability of those presenting it. A single contradiction can raise questions that echo far beyond one hearing, changing how every future word is heard, and how every action is judged. When a contradiction appears in testimony, it does more than create a moment of pause, it reshapes the entire atmosphere of a trial. That is why this particular detail carries such significance. In the justice system, words spoken under oath are meant to be the clearest form of truth. They are protected by law, measured against records, and trusted as the foundation for decision-making. When those words don't align with evidence, the impact reaches far beyond a single statement. It raises questions about credibility, about accuracy, and about whether every other piece of testimony can be trusted. This is why the moment matters. In upcoming hearings, attorneys will not only revisit the contradiction, but also build strategies around it. The defense will likely highlight it again, framing it as proof that the state's case is less certain than it appears. The prosecution, meanwhile, will continue pressing the idea that the inconsistency reveals something deeper, that it speaks to reliability, not weakness. What this means for the trial is clear. Every future witness, every future statement will now be under even closer scrutiny. The margin for error has narrowed. Attorneys, jurors, and even the public will be listening more carefully, searching for consistency, measuring every word against the evidence already presented. At its core, the importance of trust inside a courtroom cannot be overstated. Once that trust is shaken, it is difficult to restore. A single contradiction, if left unanswered, can create doubt that spreads to every corner of the case. And for a trial already carrying the weight of national attention, the cost of that doubt could shape the outcome in ways no one expected. In short, this was not just about one detail, it was about the principle that truth must remain steady, even under pressure. Because without that, the foundation of justice itself begins to waver. As the hearing came to a close, the contradiction lingered. It was not shouted, it was not dramatic, but it was undeniable. A single detail, a single statement, had shifted how the entire case is now being viewed. For those inside the courtroom, it was a reminder that truth is rarely simple. Every timeline, every record, and every testimony must be examined with care. The weight of one inconsistency does not erase the broader case, but it changes how each piece of evidence is interpreted moving forward. For the families involved, the community watching, and the nation following along, this moment underscored something larger. The search for truth is fragile. It relies on accuracy, consistency, and honesty at every stage. When even one detail doesn't align, it casts a shadow not only on the person who spoke it, but on the process itself. Trials are not only about evidence, they are also about trust. Trust in the court, trust in the witnesses, trust in the system to carry truth forward, even when it is uncomfortable. And when that trust is questioned, the pursuit of justice becomes more complex. The Emmanuel Haro case has always been layered with emotion, doubt, and unanswered questions. But now, with testimony being challenged, it has entered a new phase, one where credibility will likely matter as much as the facts themselves. As we move forward, one thing is clear: the truth may not always arrive quickly, but it always leaves a trail. And in this case, that trail has led us to a single contradiction that could shape everything that follows. The Emmanuel Haro court case is far from over, and the testimony we've examined tonight is only one chapter in a much larger story. As new hearings unfold, more details will surface, and with them more questions about what really happened and how the truth will ultimately be measured. What we do know is this: in a courtroom, every word matters. Every statement has the power to shape how the case is seen, not just by the judge and attorneys, but by the public who is watching so closely. That is why this contradiction matters. It is not just a detail, but a reminder that truth and trust walk side by side. We will continue to follow this case carefully, step by step, as the search for clarity continues. If you want to stay updated on every development, make sure you're subscribed, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Because in the end, it isn't just about what was said in one courtroom, it's about what those words mean for justice, and for the truth that everyone is waiting to see revealed.